David, tell me about your previous mental illness.
Well, I was diagnosed in 1984 with chronic paranoid schizophrenia, but I'd been ill for 3 years before that, before I actually was discovered. So it was only when I actually started exhibiting really eccentric behaviour that I was actually sectioned and taken into a mental hospital. And then from 1984 to 1987 I was sectioned twice, and I was in hospital 7 times within 3 years. And then I came out and I was still quite ill, but I was medicated, so I was on quite heavy doses of different types of medication. And then in 1989 I became a Christian, and that all changed. I started hearing voices. First of all, it was very insidious. You know, the illness is very insidious. So you actually step between fantasy and reality without actually realising it. It was only later on that it started getting worse, because as I started getting iller, more things started happening. So I started hallucinating and seeing Julius Caesar sitting in trees and going on a walkabout, and I was arrested a few times and taken into police stations. I'd see policemen dancing about and doing the can-can through the station, and you'd see things that weren't actually there, but you didn't know they weren't actually there because they were so real. I used to eat watch batteries to gain power. I used to think that you gain power from watch batteries, so I used to eat them. I used to walk across motorways at night with my eyes closed just to see whether it would kill me or not, and luckily I survived. I used to think that you didn't need money, and I used to just go and take things from places instead of paying for them. I used to just walk into shops and take things and walk back out again. And the reality was everything got jumbled up in my head, so all of the books that I'd read and films that I'd seen, and all, it's schizophrenia is a disintegration of self, so all of those things actually get jumbled up within you, and so you start actually living the books that you've read, the films that you've seen, what you've heard, the TV talks to you, the radio talks to you. You start having experiences that you're Robin Hood, and that you're, all the films that you've seen down the years. And you start becoming those people, because everything just gets muddled up inside. The size gets muddled up. The sun is small, and you're big, you're a giant, and everything. So everything just gets muddled up in it. And as it disintegrates further, it just sort of becomes more and more muddled, until in the end there is a complete breakdown. What else?
When I first met David, and he sat me down and he told me about the schizophrenia and the fact that he'd been healed, it really wasn't a problem. I think he was worried about it, but it really wasn't a problem. He'd been healed, that was the end of the story in some ways. I didn't see it as a problem.
Tomorrow 12:30. Not really, no.
I sit down. Oh, wait, sit down, please.
When we started going out together, people would ask me if I really thought Dave was healed, or what I would do if the schizophrenia came back.
And what did you say to that?
What did I say? I just told them that he was healed and that was good enough for me, and it wasn't going to come back because Jesus had healed him.
Go. No.
You have to do your homework later. Do the game, perhaps.
You mean that's my homework?
Yeah, we do the book tomorrow.
How would I describe David today? Well, I think he's the most wonderful man in the world and the best husband.
Well, in 1989 I was sitting at home watching songs of praise on a Sunday night with a big joint in my hand, and I was on massive amounts of medication. I'd just been released from hospital for the 7th time, just been out of a section, and I was feeling desperate because I thought, well, I'm going to be dead very soon because the tablets have such bad side effects, and I was on tranquilizers and antidepressants and sleeping tablets. I was on about 9 tablets a day, and I was self-medicating with street drugs. And I thought, well, if this is life, it's not worth living. I'd already made many suicide attempts within that period of time of being ill, and I decided, I'd had an experience many years before of God, and I decided to actually go and see if God was still there, and if God would have me back, if God would have basically given me a second chance. So I started going to a local church. I left my home and I started going to a local Anglican church, and for 6 months I used to just go in and sit in the church, listen to the service and run out at the end before anybody collared me, you know, because that's what happens in churches. People come up to you afterwards and say, are you a Christian? And you have to explain who you are and everything. So I sat in this church and I used to pray, and I started trying to give up all the bad habits and everything. And after 6 months, one night the vicar preached on having the faith to believe that God could actually do the impossible in your life. So after this message, I went forward for prayer, and one of the elders of the church came forward and he said, well, what's wrong with you? And I was embarrassed. I put my hand over my mouth and said schizophrenia through my hand, so he didn't actually hear, you know, it was a sort of garbled thing. And he said, no, come on, tell me what it is. So I said, I've got schizophrenia, but it's very embarrassing. There's a lot of stigma attached to it and everything, but I believe that I've heard the call of God on my life tonight, and I'm coming forward and I want prayer for healing. And he laid hands on me and prayed for me. And I went away believing that I had been healed. And from that moment I decided to live by faith and stop taking the medication. But of course I still went to my psychiatrist and got the medication and put it in a cupboard in my room. So I had a cupboard full of medication, and I did that for a year. I had no medication for a year. I came off the street drugs and everything else. And after a year I went to see my psychiatrist, and he said, oh, you seem so much better, I think we'll lessen your dose. And it was there that I chose to tell him that I'd been healed and that I wasn't on medication anymore. And I had all of the drugs in the cupboard to actually prove it. So after I'd done that, I then threw everything in the cupboard out, sort of thing. And of course the psychiatrist couldn't do anything because I'd lived a year without any attacks or any illness or any signs of anything. So that's basically how it happened. I just had the faith to believe, and I stepped out in that faith, you know, and believed that God can do those things. Let's sing that one again, shall we? I am a new creation. I am a new creation. No more in condemnation. Here in the grace of God I stand. My heart is overflowing. My love just keeps on growing. Here in the grace of God I stand. And I will praise you, Lord, yes, I will praise you, Lord, and I will sing all that you have done. A joy that knows no limit, righteous in my spirit, here in the grace of God I stand. Well, after I got healed, I spent 2 years just in the local church and helping in the local church and doing anything that I could, really. And then I wanted to put back into the community, because the community had supported me for quite a long time. You know, it was 10 years, something like 10 years that I'd really been ill. I set up a charity for the mentally ill called the Bromley Users Group, which is a very successful charity now. but I prayed it into being. And I started off with a typewriter at my kitchen table and my own benefits, and I basically built up this organisation with the Lord's help and got people involved and everything, and spent 5 years doing that. Well, when it came to the end of that 5 years, which was sort of 94, 95, I was attending quite a cutting edge church in Bromley called Cornerstone Christian Centre, and I started getting involved in the leadership there, started being a steward and helping, and then became a steward coordinator, and then of course then in 1995 felt called to go into full-time ministry, and I started going around. Me and my wife had a ministry called Stephen Ministries, and we went around teaching on servanthood first of all, and did that for a while, and then of course that came under another thing called AVSEQ Ministries. We decided that there was a lot of things within the church that we hadn't been taught or that we needed to know, so we actually started looking around for a church that could teach us all of the things that we didn't know, and we couldn't find any, so we left our church and we started a house church here, and we did that for 4 years with very little success. I think we leafleted the area 5 times. We gave out about 30,000 leaflets in 4 years in this area, in an area of 10,000 homes, and we got very little response. But we still kept doing it. We still kept doing acts, and I kept being invited to other places to preach and to teach and everything, and people seemed to want to hear the foundational truths. A lot of people would call it honesty preaching, which in a way was quite funny, because they must sort of thought that other leaders were dishonestly preaching the truth to them if I was honestly preaching the truth to them. So I started doing that, and after 4 years we were quite fed up and discouraged about it all and everything, trying to get people to actually live the Christian life, not just to talk it on a Sunday, but to live it every day. So we decided then to branch out and go out into the around the country, teaching the foundational truths in the Bible, and to get people to actually live them, to encourage and challenge people to actually live the gospel of Jesus Christ. So we've been doing that since '99, just going around. I've been going around the country and leading retreats and teaching on servanthood, teaching on evangelism, and trying to stir people up to actually live the life instead of talk the life. And at the same time, we've got to the stage now of having a young family and thinking it's about time to actually settle down in one church but still go around and teach and everything. All my old churches now have me in to go and preach 4 or 5 times a year. I go to Cornerstone 4 or 5 times a year. I preach in Kenge Baptist 4 or 5 times a year. Preach all over the place, and they all sort of want that teaching. They all want to be changed. They all want to be encouraged to live the life. So I think we'll never stop actually doing acts, because the Acts ministry basically is to teach people that the book of Acts actually has a pattern for 21st century Christians of how to live the life. So we actually still teach that, but we we've just been offered a job as leading elder of a church, in leadership in a church over in Essex, and we're praying into that as to whether that is the right move for us, or whether to still carry on itinerating and going around preaching and teaching. In the meantime, we also do a lot of counselling for people with mental health problems. Usually it's people with depression and schizophrenia and things like that, to show them there is a way out, which is Jesus Christ. And we also help people set up charities, because I act as a consultant to lots of charities now, and teach people how to set up and get bids together for funding for charities. God's just given me that talent to do that paperwork and that. So that's where we are at present.